We are ready.
This is Unfragmented, inspired by Colossians. For by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist. Join our book club as we pursue a more consistent Christian life.
All right, love that introduction with Colossians, and it's always a good reminder for me, Kevin Novak, and we've got Lee Bortons with us here, which is our co-host. And you know, the last few weeks I haven't been mentioning Julie Melendez, who is our producer, but she's of course here. And welcome to Unfragmented, where we explore the cohesion of things believed with things done. Today is May 11, 2023, and again, I'm Kevin Novak. We have Lee Bortons, our co-host. And this month, we're talking about Samuel Blumenfeld's wonderful book, Is Public Education Necessary? Many of us have read this already. If I can mention just really quick a couple other resources that might help you. This is not necessarily a book that you would read, but it's a resource, a history of Christian school education by Paul Kino. There might actually be a second volume, but I haven't come across that. I think I just heard about it. And then also The Harsh Truth About Public Schools, which was written by an attorney in Houston, Bruce Short. And Bruce, if you may have noticed, wrote the foreword to the book that we're going through here, Is Public Education Necessary? And then finally, I just want to mention again, I believe I mentioned this last week, Founding Zealots. This is a book that was written about the history of the first public schools, actually how evangelicals created America's first public schools. And I think what happened was, even though, like we're talking about here with the Unitarians and the Owenites initiating the development of the public schools, you had evangelicals that came along and really dovetailed that and were the impetus to developing the public schools in America, unfortunately. So we're trying to undo all that. And Lee, if you don't mind me just putting you on the spot here, I want to ask you a question, something that's been bugging me and just so hard for me to figure out. We've talked about many people that we respect, like Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman. How is it that people like that really can support such a thing as school choice? Can you figure that one out? Because I really haven't been able to figure that one out.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe our myth discussion might help us to figure out how people who seem very good at following the money, they just feel like the education of our citizens is the most important thing. But I think they get confused between education, propaganda, and the school system itself. And they forgot to define their terms. I think that's where they got off track.
Yeah, it just boggles me, though, and I'm open for input on this. I really don't know, but it just boggles me how someone even like Thomas Sowell can overlook such a thing as, I think, socialism is really what undergirds the public school system, and I just don't see how they don't see that. But I'm not trying to be judgmental. It just boggles me.
Yeah, well, there's the history in the United States is with our what they call organic documents with the Northwest Ordinance. So right from the beginning, the Northwest Ordinance said if you're going to become a state, you have to have in your constitution that you support the establishment of education. It does not say you have to fund it or be in control of it, but to become a state, and you have to support the idea. And so it's kind of like, I support the idea of car seats, but I bought my own. Right. And so I think that right away kind of kicked them off in the wrong direction.
Yeah. And you mentioned the myths. So we did leave off last week. We're still on page 1. We skipped around a little, but we went back to page 1 to really get back to the basics. And there were these 5 myths in the first paragraph in page 1. Before we do that, do you think it would be a good idea just to quickly kind of revisit what we talked about last week in terms of distinguishing between education and school?
Yeah, why don't you summarize it? Because I thought you had good definitions, or maybe Donna might want to jump in and remind us what we talk about.
Yeah, go ahead, Donna.
You remember?
if you're ready.
So I don't know if I remember, but I've been thinking on it all week. So I found out, so the suffix shun pretty much makes a verb a verbal. So education is just the noun of to educate. And so I was really thinking about that, and then also the C.S. Lewis quote about the irrigating deserts and cutting down forest. And what I really came to is that, so education is just teaching, and that can be whatever you're teaching, however. But then I was also thinking about the challenge 2 question, can you teach virtue? And my answer to that is always, I can teach anything. It's a matter of if the kids can learn it or not. If I'm teaching it in a way that they can learn. So I think just education in general is, you have to be able, you can teach anything in any way, but the real education comes down to, are the students learning or not? So we need to, for the irrigating deserts and the cutting down forest, it's not so much that we need to irrigate deserts or cut down forest. We just need to see what's there and go back to Plato's Minnow. And when he's take what they already know, take what's there in the desert and use that. We can eat the cactus. We can find shelter and shade under the sand and things like that. And the forest has other things to offer. So I don't know. I think it's just about, education is about learning what you have and learning about God's environment.
Yeah, I think education too often is thought of something you do to children, and what we've discovered, it's something you do with them, then it's more effective because they want to enter in. But if they don't want to enter in, you can't make them.
And you can't do that in a classroom of 30 students, no matter
harder.
what. So I was a public education teacher. So I had 1 year before I had my daughter, I taught first grade. And no matter what, you have 30 kids who are, quote, on the same level because they're all in the same classroom. But within those 30 kids, you have 30 different levels because they're all at a different spot. And it's impossible to teach all of them at the same time with the same method. So it is, and I think that's partly why the one-room schoolhouses were working better, because you had the teacher who was the lead learner who knew the most, but then you also had those older students who could teach the younger students and truly have that multi-level learning. And I found that I learn best when I'm teaching something. So even for a 12-year-old teaching a 6-year-old something about reading, that is more of an education for the 12-year-old as it is for the 6-year-old.
I think you've also stumbled on something. We've made it an adult activity to be a teacher, and yet for most of history, it's always been people that were a little bit older than the kids, a little bit, new adults, say. And like I'll watch in church, in fact, my daughter-in-law attends a church where the little girls just come up and pet her. And I've watched my boys grow up over the years, and to see the younger boys will come up and grab their hands and say, "Swing me around." Right?
Yeah.
They're like magnets to that age group. And we've made it illegal for those kids to be teachers.
Yeah. It's interesting how that has evolved, and this book doesn't touch on it, at least not what I've read so far. It's more just the overall arching political, but I'm interested, why did we go from these classrooms where students were helping students and learning themselves into 30 kids of the same age?
Money.
So, yeah, probably.
Kevin, Julie,
money and politics.
Did anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I actually was running a homeschool group before I even had kids. And I just remember at lunchtime, this is just a still shot I have in my head, seeing at lunchtime, maybe 20 kids in a room playing cards together. And the ages must have been from 10 to 18. And they're all having fun together. And it was just, that was one of the, it was a small epiphany, but it was an epiphany for me in seeing how even socialization, I know we're talking about education, but socialization, of course, is part of that. And I just, I just remember seeing that and thinking, well, that's just awesome. Things like that, observations that really blown me away. Really quick, one other thing about the terms, though, we were talking about education in school. We always have, politicians are real good at equivocating and just using the same word, but defining it different ways and using that as leverage or to fool people. But even with homeschooling now, with COVID, we've had to really be careful about what we're doing with the terms. And that goes for school choice and education freedom. So I think it's good to, like Donna was doing, really talk about what it is instead of just merely using the words.
Mhm. Yeah, it's good. So I was wondering, before we went through the myths, if you go to the paragraph below that, do we want to talk about that as an introduction? Because I think we could spend a long time on what the myths are, and I want to make sure that we understand his thesis about the myths. Would that be okay if I read that and then you guys, we can back up
Yeah.
and look at them? Because really what he's asking and the whole book is about is the beginning of that second paragraph. Why are these myths so hard to discard? And this is his answer. So when you're asking me about Thomas Sowell, I think it falls into it. Because it requires discarding an even greater myth that props up the whole edifice, that all men are created equal and that government is the great equalizer, or as a great equalizer, is the most benevolent dispenser of human goodness, generosity, and justice on earth. So even though someone like Sowell would not agree with that statement verbally, I think he actually would believe it. So what do you guys think those words mean, and do you agree or disagree with it?
So you're saying, do you think that Thomas Sowell would agree that the civil government is the great equalizer, or that he would not?
No, the part that part he'd probably argue with, that he would believe though
Okay.
that men are created equal. And that part, and so what's going, if you continue with the discussion, Blumenfeld's saying, no, we aren't. We have strengths and weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think the reason that people kind of believe that is, first of all, that's in our it's in our founding documents. So as Americans, we have it ingrained to us what the role of civil government is supposed to be. And it could be like a skewed version that I think we typically get in school.
Mhm.
But we just have that, it's a doctrine. Like it's a doctrine for Americans to believe that we are created equal, and then that's coming from the civil government. And obviously, like if we're Christians and we believe what the Bible says over what the Constitution says. So I think that's why most people, including Christians, can't see that they put a government document over the Bible. And I think we kind of talked about that when we did abolition.
Yep.
Yeah. So Kevin, for people that might listen to the recording, basically, what did you say in abolition about that?
Well, basically, if you take the U.S. Constitution and put it on top of the Bible, that's how we ought to be looking at it. And anything that we are looking at in the U.S. Constitution, and even below that, the Declaration of Independence, that should all be rooted in Scripture. And so theoretically, something in the Constitution could be unconstitutional if it isn't biblical. And so the Bible ought to be the ultimate source of how we're framing what we do, what rights are, what's proper with the civil government, family government, church government, and so on. So it all should come back to the Bible, not the U.S. Constitution.
Good. So we had 4 weeks on that. If anybody wants to go back and look at the abolition, it was our January episodes. Okay, so read the first myth. Do you want to read it, Donna? And who else is here? I don't want to leave anybody out. Michelle, yeah, Donna, you read that one.
Okay. The first myth is that public education is a great democratic institution fundamental to America's prosperity and well-being.
Take out great. Well, I guess we could define great. Do we mean large, or do we mean good, good.
Yeah.
It is great in size.
Well, and another thing, we worship the word democratic.
Well, and I don't know if it was on the book club here last week, but recently I had to, or I think it was an interview I did a couple of weeks ago on a local station here. And I said, well, a lot of people use the term traditional school and they think they're referring to public schools, or they are actually. But traditional schooling is not public schooling. And that's what I thought of when I read this first myth, that like, well, public school has, there's this assumption or kind of just ethos about public schools and the development of our country. They seem to go supposedly together. And that means to me, like, hey, we've got to be such a great nation. Well, we've always had traditional schooling, in other words, public schooling, which isn't true, of course.
Well, even his own words, because like it's classless, we got to keep looking at the definitions, which is what you just did. But if you shorten and take the key words out of that sentence, he's saying education is an institution. And I think we would disagree with that. We would say the school is the institution. Education is not an institution. So even the way he words it himself belies the general populace's view of this.
Mm-hmm. Donna had a point. Go ahead, Donna.
So for a democratic institution, there's a lack of democracy in the schools. I mean, the students have no votes. The parents kind of have a vote in that they vote for the school board, but once the school board is instituted, they don't have much vote unless they're showing up at all the meetings and really making their voice heard. Like there's a very lack of democracy in this quote democratic institution. And I think I remember in one of the master's classes, we were talking about how classical is more democratic than the modern education, because they do have a little more of a voice, and we teach them how to think and how to find ideas so that when they do get to vote, they have ideas that they're voting for or against, rather than what they were told for 12 years in an institution.
Well, because of time, let's Michelle, why don't you read the second myth? Let's see where that takes us.
Okay, the second myth is that public education is necessary as the great equalizer in our society, bringing together children from different ethnic, social, racial, and religious groups and molding them into homogenized Americans, which we are all supposed to want to be. Included in that myth is the notion that public education, because of our separation of church and state, is ideologically neutral and preaches no religious doctrine.
That feels like 3 myths at once.
Yeah,
It does.
That's at least 2.
Does anybody want to break some of it down?
I mean,
Well.
I always thought homogenized, we should stay away from that in milk. So why is it okay for schools? Right? It kills all the good stuff and then puts
Yeah.
back in what they deem as good stuff. So think about that in our schools. Yeah.
Well, and the thing is about public schools too, a lot of people claim that they're the problem solver of poverty. But any poor person who has, and I've heard this advocated, you have say a single mother, and I don't know why she's single, might not have been her fault, but single mother has a child in the public school system, saying we need more money for that public school system so that my child can escape poverty. But that makes me think, if the parent went to the public school and they're poor, how is it that public schools are solving the poverty problem? And I don't think that people understand that. The public schools do not solve the poverty problem. And this touches on some of the stuff below in the second paragraph, and eventually people are going to succeed or not to succeed on their own merits, and it won't be because of a public school.
When I first read this, I thought of the stories of missionaries from way back, that they would go into a new people group and they would Americanize or Europeanize them. They would try and, they'd build the little white chapel with the nice little steeple with the cross and everything. And they were trying to more Westernize, I guess would be the word. The people was almost as important as making them Christians. We wanted to change them into our ideal, and that doesn't work. That's not what Jesus did. Jesus didn't go to the people and try and change who they were. He changed them from the inside out, but not their culture. He doesn't change that part of them.
That's good. Yeah, so the equalization comment Nicole made about since you're zoned by school district, right? We tried busing to get over what you said. For those of you that are older, remember what busing is.
Yeah.
I was
yeah.
bused, and it was really a bad situation. But all of it was bad. That just added to it. So there's a lack of diversity. Yeah.
I was
So,
not bused, and I was a minority.
mhm,
I lived in inner city Houston, basically.
yeah. I guess we had reverse busing going on because I was the minority at the school I went to, but I didn't live near it. Anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, when I was in middle school, I was probably one of the first generation of kids that got bused. And it was so ridiculous where we were living, because the suburb kids would go to the inner city for 2 years, and then the inner city kids would come out to the suburbs, and then we just flip flop. So every 2 years, kids were moving, but it was the same group of peoples. So it was the inner city kids out in the suburbs, and then it was the suburb kids in the inner city. It was just ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, the thing I find out as being homeschoolers, we live in a really white neighborhood. That's absolutely true. But we are out so much and about in our community, which is not necessarily white. Right, there's all kinds. We're right next to a big Hispanic community, and then we have a Black community. So they're meeting other folks is because they're out during the day, whereas the other kids are stuck in the building.
Well, and I think what bugs me about social engineering is that, we need to get past this idea that just because someone looks different, that they are different. That just because someone is white or Black or Hispanic, that they're not like me. And that bugs me. It's not true. And it also bugs me. And I find that to be insulting, because I grew up and this wasn't my mother's fault, but I grew up in a single household, and a single parent household, and with 3 siblings. So there were 4 of us, and we didn't have a lot of money. I mean, it wasn't a big deal, because I didn't necessarily know it, and we were kids, so we just were resilient, and so was my mother. But we would not necessarily have had a lot in common with what liberals might think are like your typical white privileged family. That wasn't us. I oftentimes that I have more in common in my childhood with like someone that looks a lot different than me. So that's an assumption that even Christians make, is that, we need more of this type of person in our church. Well, every single human is diverse.
Yeah.
We're all different people.
Yeah. And that's enough diversity in it.
And there's something that I've also learned as an adult is, if we were all equalized in our education and we all took to everything as education as well as we do, I still need somebody to fix my toilet when it breaks. And I still need my air conditioner guy. He's very important. So in Houston, but you need these tradesmen. But if these tradesmen have doctorate degrees, then they're not going to want the pay that I'm willing to pay them, or the ability, that I have. So an equalization in education even if it is just through the 12 years, you have to have some diversity there because you have a diversity of needed fields. We need the doctors to help heal us, and we need the plumbers to heal my toilet if it's broken. You know, they're both equally necessary at different times.
Yeah, that's true. And this ideologically neutral, it's kind of like with the math map and writing it, and I'm just bulking against that since I was my early years as a Christian. In the mid-20s, I became one. And just like, no, math is not neutral. There's philosophy and ideology behind it, but no one's taught what it is. And so we're seeing this whole idea that the school can be neutral. I mean, that's what Jesus said he's going to spit out, right? The lukewarm. You're not for me, you're against me. So it's not even,
He
even
also-
if it was ideal, it's not what we want.
He's also going to give us different gifts.
Mhm.
There are those who are gifted in engineering and figuring things out, and there are those that are gifted in other, there's medical things that just, they're interested in that, they're gifted in that. And just as in the church, you need that. You needed the full body. You can't, you might be able to go without your pinky toe, but it helps with balance. It's important.
You mean it's not a vestigial organ like the kidneys or like your appendix, which makes a lot of antibiotics in your body? Right. So
Yep.
it's just bad idea.
My gallbladder, which they took out a couple of years ago.
Yeah. All right, Kevin, why don't you read the third myth? I'm
Sure,
gonna move
sure.
us
The
on,
third
and we can
myth
go
is
back.
the third myth is that it provides the best possible education because we are the best possible country spending the most possible money. Well, if I might, if you don't mind me interjecting this is the perfect time to do this. So the movie I'm about to refer to has some bad language in it, but has anyone ever heard of that movie, Good Will Hunting?
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but
I liked it.
there's a line in there I really love, and I'll share it here, where Will, he's the blue collar guy, the smart guy, and he gets into an argument with a guy going to Harvard, the Harvardian. And I don't get a chance to use that word that often, the Harvardian. And so, and then Will says to him at one point, at some point in your life, you're going to realize that you spent $150,000 on an education you could have gotten for $1.50 in late fees at the library. And I love that line so much. I try to use it as much as I can, but it's beautiful because it's not about the money, with classical education. And I don't believe in public libraries, but my family goes there once a week, and all the stuff they bring home and just read those books. And, you can spend a lot less money on a quality education. So it's definitely not about spent money.
Mhm.
Well, and you can easily compare the statistics of our, some standardized tests that other countries have done compared to us. They're smarter.
Yeah. The NAEP, National Association of Educational Progress, every year comes out with data, and we're at
Yeah.
the bottom 7% in pretty much everything.
Yep, we keep doing worse, and
Mhm.
we keep putting more money into it.
But we are the best possible country because of our founding principles, if we could just live them out. So I want to put a plug in. I love my country. Okay, who wants to read the fifth one, Nicole? Or the fourth myth?
All right. The fourth myth is that the neighborhood schools, with its cadre of dedicated teachers and administrators, belongs to the community and is answerable to it through an elected school board.
So Donna referred to that earlier. Anybody else want to say something about this? Or piggyback on what she said?
Yeah, I think I mentioned last week about Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS, and I think they're the most influential body, but it's not like you can go there and petition them very easily. So I think David Barton, a lot of people have written about this, but David Barton, I think in Original Intent, I think he's got some graphs in there too that show like how morality went down when these Supreme Court cases started coming out where we, took prayer out of the public schools and so on. I'm not in favor of like just putting public or prayer back into public schools. It's not that simple, but there obviously is a correlation there. And I think the Supreme Court has the greatest influence. And I don't think people think that. I think people think it is a local school board. They're locally controlled, and that is definitely a myth.
So I would, well, I guess I have a question. They're taking the public prayer out of the school, and then the correlation of the decline, I would say it was already declining. Otherwise, they never would have taken it out. It was just the natural.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, do you disagree?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a
Mhm.
good point. I could see that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I mean, I just keep saying on the radio about Christian education and Christian as in public schools, that public schools have succeeded. Maybe I already said this here, but definitely succeeded. It took 6 generations for them to succeed because there was so much Christian capital surrounding it before, and now that's what's missing. So it just all has declined. So dedicated teachers and administrators. I'll throw something at you and you tell me if I'm being mean or not. So when I hear a Christian say that they're a missionary in their school, at a public school, I always say to them, so do you raise your own funding? You see where I'm getting?
Yeah.
And my question is, if you're a missionary in the school, can you have your Bible out on your desk?
Mhm.
I mean, just something as simple as that isn't necessarily welcome within the public schools.
No.
So as a teacher, it would be extremely hard to be a missionary in the school. As a student, you have a little more leeway.
So I guess, Donna, the reason why I brought up that example is because I've heard teacher after teacher say they actually do have their Bible and they're able to minister to their kids. And the one thing that's 100% true in every one of them is someone else is paying their bills. And then that
Oh,
means,
yeah.
right, so you can't serve 2 masters. And if you think you are, then, you're kind of just fooling yourself. And then we wonder why, okay, so weren't most of the people who began in public education Christians? What happened to them? The system drives it out of you. You just don't even know that's what's happening. Oh,
Well,
Well,
I think this,
go ahead, Michelle.
I was going to say, I think the system drives it out of you because it pounds into your head that you must go to work. And then you have couples that get married and they both have jobs, and then they don't have time for their students' education because they've got car payments, a house payment, insurance. They've got all this stuff. And they also have a mentality of, if I do this, I'm going to kill my kid. I can't tell you the number of people that have like worshiped me because they said, I don't know how you do it. I'd kill my kid. Like,
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
You'd really do that? I don't think so, but it sounds funny, haha. But I just think that people, parents are just so disconnected from it's so hard. You cannot get up in the morning and put on your mom hat, make the lunches, get them on the school bus, and then drive to work, take off your mom hat, put on your business hat, do all the stuff that you need to do for an employer, and then come back home. And sorry, I'm sitting outside because my kids are having a dance rehearsal, dress rehearsal. And, then take that hat off, come home, cook the meal, get everybody, fed, look at homework assignments. You cannot do it. And the conspiracy theory in my heart is that they want it that way. They want it that way. They don't want you paying attention. And I think this is what COVID did. A lot of eyes got opened up. And I don't see how a parent can do that. It just, why they want to relinquish all of that power. That's more mind-boggling to me.
Also the
Because it's the
indoctrination.
same, yeah,
Okay.
it's the same power they were under.
Yeah.
They're afraid what I put in the chat is they're afraid to teach, they're afraid to homeschool because they don't have they don't think they're smart enough to teach their kids because they were educated by the exact same place they're sending their kids to also not be educated, because that place can educate them better than me because it educated me so poorly.
And that's what Kevin said earlier. So it's like they don't even notice the bad logic behind it.
Because you're not taught logic.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's so frustrating. I mean, it's comparable though to like trying to logic, and I think you can use logic in explaining the gospel and the Bible and that's true and so on. But ultimately, whether someone accepts it, that truth is just, no matter how much you throw at them, you just can't make them get it. But I mean, I think we would all agree we're making a great progress. I mean, I know the numbers can be hard to get at. I know we've got some rough numbers about homeschooling, but I think, and I know Brian Ray has done some work on this and some others, but generationally, I think that like the homeschool children are growing up, the majority of them are growing up to think that they want to at least privately educate their children and maybe even homeschool. That's what I think is happening. So I think we're just going to keep growing in numbers.
Well, the thing that we don't really talk about a lot is homeschoolers, but because I'm involved with all kinds of private education models, the Association of Classical Christian Schools opened 100 new campuses last year, and they still have waiting lists. And so that's where those who are classically minded tend to go if they don't have a charter school, right, which would be public ed. If they truly want out, they go to ACCS or an SCL school. So they're seeing, I feel like homeschooling's behind them because it's just going to a school is important to so many parents. And so I feel like then the next move is then they join us more permanently. And this is another thing that's really, I'll share with you, but and everybody will hear about it. I'm friends with a lot of Association of Classical Christian School teachers and headmasters and things, and a wonderful organization. They're the kind of thing that want to exist so that should I have a horrible thing occur or my kids or whatever, we have a school. But they're starting to wonder about what in the world are they doing because of how well homeschoolers are doing. So they're even asking questions, and we'll see what happens if they change their models, because what they're starting to notice is, oh, we are classical on top, and I mean, we're Christian on top of the education, and we're classical underneath. They're starting to see that that's a different, and they want to be Christian underneath also. I'm not talking about like Doug Wilson, he gets that, but there's, tons of other schools that are in that association, and they're starting to wonder what in the world they've done to the family. So I think we're going to win.
Who said that? I like that.
Yeah. Okay, so who hasn't read yet that has a book? Do you want to read, Jennifer or Lisa or else Julie, or do you not have a book?
No, I don't have the book. Sorry.
Okay, I'll read it. The last myth is, the fifth myth is that our society cannot survive without it. That is public education and all the people who run it.
Well, I was trying to have a conversation about this. Well, I had a conversation with one of my coworkers a couple weeks ago. It was a fruitful conversation because he agrees with me. He's an older gentleman, but he he didn't homeschool his kids. He says if he had to do it all over again, he would. But it was like I tried to explain to him that when we move back towards Christian education, hopefully it won't take as long as it did for the liberals to build public schools, but it will happen slowly. And he seemed to think that there'd be some catastrophes out there and just a lot of really bad things with criminals and people running around in the streets and all this if there weren't public schools, because oftentimes I get people responding to, if we didn't have public schools, it's like, well, where would Where would the deviant children go during the day? You know, things like that. Like, why are we even talking about this? Why is that your primary concern? But there still is that, you know, people are going to cling to whatever it is they can cling to. And it's not like we're going to suddenly have an angelic society where like there are no sinners. We'll still have that, but we can definitely survive without publication or public education.
It's just what he knows. Like he doesn't have the experience of seeing an alternative. And so we let our imaginations run wild. And so he sees the kids not being part of anything versus we see, no, maybe they'll be part of their family again. Like we feel like there's a solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point.
People just don't know. But
Well,
education's not the answer, because even if they do know, they're sinners, like you said.
I mean, it's just a lot, you know, I probably have the least amount of conversations about this than anyone here, and that's okay. But I mean, you talk to people about these things and you plant some seeds, and then you come back a couple weeks later, and you know, it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
It really does.
Mm-hmm. The thing is, we have to have a winsome vocabulary. And I didn't at first when, you know, I was like, well, you know, what's wrong with you? Why don't you homeschool was kind of my attitude. And this, just having the stage that I have now and recognizing I have to say it nicely or they won't listen to me the next time. So we just have to get better at the wooing of it. And so I tend to talk about our children being, you know, a little better than, or I might have said this too before, but they're lower than the angels, not just a little better than apes, or that we want them to have fat souls, or that children who spend their time with adults learn to delay gratification, things that every adult wants to hear about children. They just don't think about. They just think sitting at a desk versus education. So the myth is the myths won't be broken till our language gets better. And why is that? Because Jesus is the word. It's the goodness of God that woos men unto him. This is why I get so upset with Fox News and Republicans and things like that. I'm like, no, you're just making it worse. Could you just be nice? So anyway, well, it seems like we're all preaching to the choir, but guess what? We're getting better at preaching by doing that and coming up with better words. Any closing thoughts from anybody? You know what? We sound like we sound like a bunch of radicals being against, you know, equality and democracy and all these things, and it's not. So I think our definitions are just so much different and broader and maybe more historic. But go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you know, and I used to do like a short radio segment. I think I did one on this, but if anyone can just visit page 91 at some point, and this is Robert Dale Owen. Yeah, Robert Dale Owen describing his father from 7 in the morning until 10 at night. He thinks of nothing, speaks of nothing, acts for nothing, save only and alone the furtherance of his system of reform. Nothing interests him but that one engrossing theme. Nothing seems to him of value, but with direct reference thereto. No one useful, but as he promotes it. No one intelligent, but as he understands it. And so he's just talking about his dad's zeal for building a public school system. And certainly there's nothing wrong with having different occupations and things and gifts and things you focus on. But that part of the book is probably what I'll always remember. And someday I hope that my children describe me about Christian education more broadly. And I think in getting to the spirit of that and wanting to be successful or at least effective in God's eyes and discipling our children, that means a lot to me. And obviously in the opposite sense, in building a Christian ethic and culture in our home.
I'm glad you pointed that out. I hadn't read that yet. I mean, to us, it reminds me of Paul when he talks about to just pray without ceasing and to always be ready with an answer. And that's, we should be the way this son describes his father. That's how I hope my kids describe me in thinking about Jesus.
Mhm.
That's good. Okay, you end in prayer?
Hey,
Oh,
yeah, let's do it. Okay, Heavenly Father, we're so thankful that you have given us some things to think about, some ways to improve. And we thank you for each other, that we can be iron and sharpen iron. We thank you for so many intelligent people that we can help one another, but we do know that we have a lot of work ahead of us. And we thank you for that work, and we look forward to accomplishing it. We do pray for all the people that visit this book club hereafter, that they can learn from it and ponder the things that we think about. But most importantly, just ponder your son Jesus, and then his being the word and all the things that you reveal to us as humans. And we thank you for that. And we thank you for this book club. And I pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. So time's kind of running out. Do you guys mind if we talk about chapter 12? Since I read that one, the end of the book next week, and then we'll do a summarization
Yeah.
afterwards, or even chapter 11 and 12 next time. Because what I'm still trying to figure out is what would Samuel Blumenfeld say now? I'm not sure that I know.
So you want to talk about that next week, or you want to talk about that now?
No, next week.
Oh, okay, sure.
That's all
Yeah,
right.
that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm finding if we
Yeah,
say what
that's good.
chapters we're reading, we tend to get more of it done. So thanks.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay.
Bye.
Well, everyone, good. Yeah. Have a good night, everyone.
I
Thank you.
Thank you.